welcome to the final valedictory session for this very, very interesting 3-day conference that we had. I'm pleased and delighted to welcome our IFA Asia Pacific colleagues, Ichiwan, and more importantly, our theme speaker, Mr. N. Venkatraman, Additional Solicitor General of India, Supreme Court of India. It's very easy to read out somebody's resume, which is given to you as a text. But let me try something different. Yes, I will talk something basic about Mr. Venkatraman, a noted jurist in the subject of tax, constitution, and commercial law, which includes a host of regulatory matters, including matters within TRAI, gas matters. He was appointed as the ASG last year by the Supreme Court, also counted amongst the youngest to be designated as a senior advocate at the age of 39, has a unique distinction, I don't know how many senior advocates have this, of appearing in 24 high courts. He was trained under the pupillage of Mr. C. Natarajan, considered as a doyen of the tax bar in Chennai, and he was elevated on recommendations of Mr. Harish Salve, QC. His proficiency in public law received tremendous accolades in the famous Sabrimala case when the Supreme Court of India's Constitution bench was pleased to refer the matter to the 9 judges. Let me talk a little bit about what people really don't know about him, which is his spiritual journey and a bent of mind, which in his view are his greatest strengths, from wherein he not just derives tremendous amount of energy and enthusiasm, but more importantly, a willingness to listen, which is, I guess, a rarity amongst most of the jurists. He stands for a host of social, religious, and nation-building causes, including running subsidized school in his mother's village, which has a capacity to teach 125 students. He's a firm believer of youth and the future citizens. He has a public profile, YouTube, and a Facebook page, which has several thousands of followers, wherein he not just puts out public speaking commitments, but also incredible, unique skills, wherein he blends philosophy, religion, Indian value systems from Rig Veda to interpret law. I had the privilege to assist him on a landmark transfer pricing case in the Delhi Tribunal, I guess 2007. It was a bench that was led by the president of the ITAT. It was also amongst the first transfer pricing cases wherein important principles of law were laid down, some of which were retrospectively amended. His ability to listen, grasp, and plead left an undeniable impact on me, including his generosity to allow me to address the court on an issue where he was leading us. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Honorable Mr. Venkatraman, Additional Solicitor General of India. Thank you very much, sir.
Sharada Sharadamboja Vadana Vadanambujai Sarvata Sarvata Smakam Sannithim Kriya. Hi Ishwan, Nilesh, and my dear Mukesh, and all the respected and distinguished guests of this evening. It's a very, very rare privilege and honor to be part of this panel and in IFA, with whom any tax practitioner would love to associate in some way. And that too to do a valedictory address, even though I've not been sufficiently that aged. So Mukesh still thought I should still do it, and I couldn't say no to him. And it's more a pleasure to address this gathering. And I have 3 or 4 issues which I thought I will place it before these distinguished audience across Asia Pacific. This year and the last year, all over the world, we are gripped with a unique crisis of the century, which all of us are aware of. And therefore, tax administration across the world and rather nations' administration across the world went into a lot of trouble. So India as a country, vast population, vast area, it handled COVID in a first phase with a national lockdown. And during the second phase in 2021, decided to localize out of learnings over a period of a year and based on international practices. As a result of these two variations, the tax schemes, the exemptions, the extensions in terms of GST laws and income tax laws broadly had to be monitored very carefully. And the government has been doing its very best in extending the timelines for returns, timelines in some acts for payments, and zero interest for a brief period, followed by minimal interest, followed by the actual interest. So these schemes had to necessarily be in place to ensure that the tax community is able to balance its work. Now, because of the national lockdown, the first phase was a national lockdown for almost 2 months, complete. And therefore, the economy came actually to a standstill. But in the second COVID phase, even though it was pitched more vigorously against our human race, at least in India, we were compelled to balance between the social, health, and life priorities, and equally the economic health and status of India. This was a challenge which we necessarily had to meet with. And therefore, I thought I should first give you a very short statistics initially at the macro picture, and then we will get into some of the tax issues which we need to do. The national lockdown led us to a contraction on the output by 24%. And the degrowth was very visible in 4 areas: capital goods by 19%, consumer durables by 15%, intermediate goods by 9.7%, and infrastructure by 9.1%, besides contact-based services, tourism, hospitality, and a host of industries. This was because we had to necessarily close down. But Q3 started to bring out very good results. And that's the point which I thought I should drive it home for all the tax practitioners, listeners, and the audience, that we could bounce back from the Q3. And how did we bounce back? Of course, agriculture was so good to us last year. We had a record production of food grains, and tractor sales went up by 172%. And when you compare March 2021, April 2021 from last year, industrial production rose up by 22%, core industries by 6.8%, power consumption, which was 6.5% in April 2020, became 40% more in April 2021. The e-way bills for last year, April 2020, was 3.8 lakh crores because of the national lockdown. And the e-way bills, which was issued in April 2021, is 17.38 lakh crores. Just to give you the resurgence. In March, when you compare the port traffic, in fact, the freight corridor in the railway traffic has increased to double digits. And if you consider merchandise export as such, April 2020, it was just 10.4 billion because of lockdown. And in April 2021, it is 30.6 billion, 195% growth. When it comes to import, it has shot up by 167%. And if you want just an idea of the foreign protected investment this year, it is 36.2 billion, highest post 2014-15. And the gross FDI investment into India is 81.7 billion. And happy to share that the GST collections for the last few months, we have crossed the 1 lakh crore, and we are able to touch somewhere between 1.2 to 1.4 lakh crores per month. And the TDS collections under the income tax is around the 50,000 crore mark. So we are able to do between 1.7 to 2 lakh crores in this. So this is the type of resurgence which we have reached over a period of few months. This is something more than getting stuck with what happened last year. It's the time for us together as a nation, as a part of building the nation, to look forward at what best each one can contribute in its progress towards this economy, as much as we concentrate on medical care, healthcare, and the various priorities in protecting lives, in preserving lives, in nurturing the health condition of those workers who do for us, the frontline workers, and so on. This is the picture of the economy, nation for the past 1 year. In the process, when it comes to tax, at least 3 key things have happened, and it's doing well is the normal general feeling, even though there might be ifs and buts here and there, with the initiation of the faceless assessment for the first time in India, which is a few months old, but for the last month before extension was granted. The normal census is doing well. There may be 1 or 2 cases of extreme actions, but it's too early. I'm only requesting all of you not to conclude it one way or the other. You have to give the time frame for it to succeed. And whatever ammunitions or the amendments or the course corrections, that it'll all take place. When we started electronic filing years back in our returns, we did not have problem. So these things will take its own color and shape. But this is one initiative which this government has done in the last year. The second important is dissecting tax people who comply with tax and people who evade. And the real deduction method of catching hold of real-time evasion and giving a period of 10 years, and those who are tax compliant to do it within a period of 3 years is again one more innovation which happened last year. And the third important aspect, which possibly we must all bear it in mind, is now we are compelled as professionals, as businessmen, as citizens, if you want to be current, alive, and then do your work, there is a compulsion all over the world to migrate to technology. This is now the watchword. At least, I'm sure the alternate dispute resolution mechanism all over the world will now become virtual. At least this is just an assumption at this point of time. So like that, there are many which will migrate 100% virtual. But once pandemic is over, all of us have to necessarily take a call to ensure the bringing in of a hybrid system in wherever it is necessary. For example, in our own case, in the case of courts, all of us have migrated. Thousands and thousands of cases have been disposed of across India over a period of time. In fact, in one of the meetings, the law minister presented a clear data, how much of disposals has happened in the last 1 year. But if you're going to be completely virtual post-pandemic, it's bound to naturally not promote the local talent in the district level and at the state level. So it's a very vast country, and we need to preserve local talent and nurture them for them to give that promising opportunities to come up. So things post-pandemic has to span out in this question of a total migration to a semi-migration or a hybrid migration. This is something which all of us need to plan over a period of time. Now, coming to the second part, I thought I should touch upon this aspect. See, we are now into GST for the last 4 years. And it was a virtual impossible dream in 1993. So in, say, 17 plus 8, 25 years, in a quarter century, why was it a nightmare in 1993 when the first Rajachalia committee was formed? Because we are a federal setup with irreconcilable differences in the political alignments. But in 2017, all of us, India continues to be a federal country, and India continues to be governed by governments which are different from the center and the states in some states. But we have now reached an area what is called as cooperative federalism, looking beyond politics for the purpose of business and trade. And that's the convergence, that's the hallmark, and that's the defining moment. We say it as the GST moment. We have proved to the world and through the Constitution that it is still possible for us to look beyond mere politics. So this is one milestone achievement in GST which looked impossible. Why I'm saying this as a comparison is, when it comes to international taxation, I'm not the first person who is saying this. Many have spoken about it. I myself heard it in various IFI conferences. And many will speak it here in future too. See, if we want to reach somewhere near an income of $100 getting taxed only for 100, and intrinsically, collectively, in all the jurisdiction only to the percentage notified, instead of it becoming 100 tax on $150, tax on $200, or double, triple, whatever it is, in some way, which is happening today, then somewhere IFA and such association with greater bodies should associate and start working. It will take decades working towards, when we have worked towards one nation, one tax, why not we translate that as to one world, one tax in the case of an international taxation scenario. So this is something which I think over a period of time, things have to be planned. Various convergence happen, but they don't finally connect there. Because why it's not happening? Because the philosophy of taxation is different from countries and regions and continents. The kind of taxes imposed are different. The system of taxation and the local level arrangements are very different. And there are a lot of differences even amongst tax treaties, tax rates, and low tax jurisdiction, existence of tax havens. So when you navigate into international taxation for a uniformity, you need to cross all these filters to reach there. And how is it possible? When is it possible? In 1983, if Dr. Chalia has thought that no, this is the non-starter, then we would not have been here where we are in 2017. So time has come that all of you, whenever possible, let's start this work somewhere. It's going to take a long time, but it is not impossible. And a day where we reach there will be a historic day for whoever has practiced international taxation to say, I have done my little mite in contributing towards the success of this idea of one world, one tax. Now, the third important point I thought I should talk about is two important issues, which is possibly, in fact, I had the pleasure of listening to experts in the previous session on software, so wonderfully presented each one's view and with a lot of clarity. But, I thought, because this is one of the finest forums and Mukesh Bhai has given me the opportunity to present. So is there still something to discuss about on software? Has it reached the ultimate? Of course, in our country, Supreme Court is the ultimate under the Constitution, and a Supreme Court judgment is a law under Article 141 and it binds. But the beauty of Supreme Court is, even though its judgments bind everybody, it does not bind the Supreme Court. That's why Supreme Court has always thought it fit, wherever necessary and occasions arise, it can always re-examine issues. Now, I just thought as an idea, 2 or 3 things can be placed for the kind consideration of all of you. There are a host of things to place, but I don't want to convert this validated address into a software webinar. Just 2 or 3 important key principles. See, the decision on TDS by this judgment is something which needs to be pondered upon. I'll tell you the basis. See, before Supreme Court could decide this matter, appeals were filed both by the assessee community and also by the government. It's not that the trend of law was held only in favor of the assessee across India. So this difference is not in the tax administration. Even at the High Court level, we could find different views emerging. It may be 1:10, 1:2:10. That's a different question, but different views emerged. And that is why a retrospective amendment was brought, say, in 2012, and which the court has said it travels back at least to 1993, when software became one of the dispensations within the country. So when there are conflicting views and the doubts have emerged, and then the law travels back, which traveling back has been upheld by the court, how could we now say that TDS payment is an impossibility? Because you had divided views, and you say the law travels back because of doubts. It has been held to be a clarificatory amendment. And therefore, how could both be reconciled? Is just one doubt I thought academically I should place it for this August forum to ponder upon. Now let's translate this non-uniformity at a global level, just as a discussion. If you put a question to yourself as practitioners of international taxation, can you come to the conclusion that the world all over, continents all over, have viewed software taxation in only one particular way, either in favor of the revenue or in favor of the assessee? Can somebody say so? No. Factually, statistically, it's not so. South Africa, Australia, countries like that have also taken a different view based on treaties. It's not so. The threshold that you may be taxable under income tax, but I need a complete protection under DTA, therefore software problem is solved. If you say so, what has been the global practice? Has there been an absolute uniformity to say that because it is completely uniform all over the world, then that uniformity should prevail? It is not so. And why, if uniformity prevails, then why so many discussions? So, both at the Indian level and at the global level, when you don't find uniformity, then you are entitled to pursue an interpretation which will find accord as an approval based on judicial principles in your own country. You don't have to necessarily follow a particular model because there are divided views. So this ununiformity, to how far it has enforced or reinforced the principle on software taxation, is again one more area which possibly requires an assessment at some point of time. Then go a little further. When your treaties are modeled basically in UN model, can you say another model is the ultimate? We respect each model. There are a number of judgments of our courts which has referred to that. Even though we are not a member, we are a very respected entity in that body, and our views are being heard. Even last few days, huge discussions are going on digital taxation. Our views are respected, and therefore what we say is not in any way something which is disrespectful, not at all. We're only saying that when your model is different, and when there is no uniformity in the taxation principle across the globe and within India, is it that you should say that this model has a persuasive value and therefore you should follow it? That's one question. Again, one has to possibly ponder upon and then discuss. Especially, in fact, we had a good meeting post the judgment, and people who have worked the treaties which needs to be renewed, which came up for consideration before the Supreme Court. People who have worked the treaty had the opportunity to interact with them. And once you put a reservation clause, the understanding by the world is it is a form of dissent. That's the understanding. So, English or semantics or language interpretation, dissent may be different from reservation. Because why do they say so? In fact, if you recently had an opportunity to work a very important treaty in indirect taxes, very, very important treaty. It has several filters of policymakers, ending with the final political governance. To make something, a alphabet to change, a comma to change, it's not going to be easy. It's not easy writing a treaty between countries. I had the chance, therefore I'm saying this. So, therefore, it is normally expressed in some form. And because every time you can't go through these filters, no nation has the time. Treaty making is one of the specs or the minuscule issues in a whole process of governance. And therefore, these are issues which possibly we have to, whoever gets the opportunity and whenever they get the opportunity. That's why Supreme Court always says our judgments bind the whole of India, but we are not bound by our own judgments. We can always have a relook if there is an issue that needs to have a relook. So how it's going to span out, when it's span out, don't ask me such questions. I'm just putting you a perspective for your own. I mean, because it's a forum comprising of intellectuals, and therefore we should share it here. Now, this is one issue. Now, the second issue is about this. I'm not talking or defending or offending retrospective amendments. I'm not taking any stand on that point. When Vodafone got pronounced in 2011, there was a huge debate for at least 3-4 years on whether retrospective amendment should be made or not, and positions were taken clearly by various people in various ways. So what we now possibly, at least what I present now, is not a variation or an inconsistency to those views. Let's be very clear about it. See, those are era where you dealt a tax case and a tax amendment, and purely from a tax amendment perspective, whether we should have retrospective, prospective, all those theories. And I can tell you, investment was one of the greatest criteria. We had it in mind 10 years back because world was moving. So one thing we have found out over a period of time, at least, this is again my personal, this one is my personal, that investment is something based on perception rather than on reality. What will make somebody invest is a matter of perception rather than a matter of factual reality in every case. It differs from case to case. All right. Now, those positions at those point of time and the documentations which have happened around that period is completely different from the scenario which we are currently facing as a country. In 2020, 2021, the last 2 years, 1.5 years, our nation is being showcased as though we are very unkind, we are very uncharitable, and we are it's anti-investment destinations. Types of this filling up various columns across the world. The basis is the Vodafone judgment and its retrospectivity. And therefore, I think it's our duty as a nation to ponder upon a few things, which I thought I will place very briefly. I had a 90-minute talk yesterday on this in a webinar. I'll condense it into, say, 7-8 minutes of pulp and leave it there. See, Let's understand very dispassionately. Let's neither be emotional nor take sides. I'm trying to only promote an idea for you to think and deliberate. Vodafone is a judgment rendered by 3 judges. And between 1983 and 2011, the law that was prevalent in India is based on the Constitutional Bench judgment on McDonnell, which said substance over form shall prevail, which said JAR is part of Indian law. When I say JAR, it is Judicial Anti-Avoidance Rules, vis-a-vis GAR, which is legislative. And in fact, Justice Chinnappa Reddy goes one step further to say, look here, you can't expect legislations to be coming after you every time to circumvent what you plan. It is the duty of the courts to interpret whether in substance this is a tax planning structure or a tax avoidance structure. Very clearly, he said, it's a job of the court. And over a period of, say, 83 to 2011, which is almost 3 decades, JAR had unfurled itself in 4 areas: as substance over form theory, as piercing the corporate veil theory, as doctrine of series of transactions, the Ramsay doctrine, where they find intermediate structures to be without substance or commercial or business purpose, knock it off. And fourth, at least globally, which India has also inherited, very important theory, is the dominant principle test. Because once substance test started to gain momentum, there was an effort to dilute it. And what's the best way to dilute it? You show some commercial substance, some business purpose beyond tax avoidance, and say that, look here, my structure, at least semblance, it validates something like this. So the interpretation was, we can't go by that. Your dominant intention was to avoid taxes, and therefore in substance, this is a tax avoidance, and therefore we cannot approve it. So this was the judgment by the Constitutional Bench, followed by spate of judgments in the high courts, including Supreme Court. And the only decision which, according to me, is not different or have distinguished it is Azadi. The reason being, Azadi is not a transaction-specific judgment at all. It was testing the policy of the government in a public interest litigation. And all of us know a policy is the prerogative of the government in power. And courts refrain from interfering or interpreting policy matters, because that will be getting into a very important, breaking the ground rule of one of the most fundamental constitutional principles called the doctrine of separation of powers, which is a foundational doctrine and a basic structure doctrine. So what courts should do, governance should not do, and what governance should do, courts should not do. That's an understanding. So that was at a policy level that was attacked. And therefore, court said there that this policy we can't interfere and that's sustainable. Of course, it did say there that I think McDowell judgment, the views of Justice Chinnappa Reddy is a minority view, which even Vodafone corrected it, saying that that is not so, because all the 4 judges have expressed what is tax planning, in that case as tax avoidance, validated further by Justice Reddy, which the 4 learned judges said we agree with. So this was clarified in Vodafone. So therefore, there was no judgment between 83 and 2011 against us, against the revenue to say, yeah, tax avoidance can be developed as a tax plan. So now the question that comes up for consideration is, I'm testing it from an investment perspective first. Please understand, more than the tax perspective. Has these legislations been the retrospective? Can you see it as anti-investment? Whether it is correct or not for tax purposes is a separate question. We'll deal it later. It can be sustained. That's a policy issue. But is it anti-investment is the question. See, when this is the law for 3 decades, what did Supreme Court do in Vodafone? It could not have overruled McDowell because it is 3 judges. You can't say 3 judges cannot sit on judgment over 5 to say it's bad in law. Therefore, it sustained McDowell. It said substance test is valid. It sustained the Jar principle. It said India is used to application of Jar. It upheld Jar. After saying that, it did 2 things. It divided the substance test into 2, saying that if investments flow into India, which is giving employment, which is giving wealth creation, which is giving taxes, and post-exit, the business in India continues to work and it continues to expand. So these are all factors which one has to bear in mind. Those structures, you don't have to apply the substance of Jar Act. On the other hand, if these are brought as investments but are used for paying bribes, used to do round tripping, used to do transactions which are illegal in law, then hunt their heads, close the structure, and also collect the taxes if you can. So this division happened in Vodafone. So the question is, all right, you want a theory. This theory, where does it have its root or base prior to 2011? That's the question. It is something of a new origin because McDowell has not split substance into any 2 tests, nor any judgment subsequent to McDowell. So you have done something for the first time. And how was this sustained? That's very important. How was this sustained? They sustained it by saying, look here, you read 9.1, it says assets situated in India, which means direct transfers. Indirect transfers, 9.1 as it stood then is incapable. So we will have to apply only at the look-at test. We cannot invoke the look-through test because legislation has not provided for the look-through test. That's the finding. That is how they sustained this transaction and allowed it. Simple question we need to ask is, what does this look-through test mean? What does it mean? You have used a coinage, no doubt, but what does it mean? It can only mean substance over form. It can't mean anything else. If you look at, then the apparent is real or not. If you look through, then you're looking into the substance over form test. So it is a new coinage to the old formula called substance over form. And substance over form is the test approved by 5 judges, which is again approved by 3 judges in Vodafone. Jar is nothing but an expanded principle of substance over form into 4 avatars, which I narrated earlier. Substance over form, see the doctrine of series of transaction, piercing the corporate will, and dominant intention. And what does the constitutional bench say, which one judge says, which 4 agrees? It is not the duty of the legislature to keep amending laws. It is the duty of the court to see a transaction and see whether it is tax avoidance or tax planning. So the responsibility is only with the court. 5 judges. So how could the court find fault to say 9.1 does not have a provision for indirect transfer? Therefore, the question is whether Vodafone is per incurium. When you see, these are all, why are we going to explore all this? Because our nation is showcased very poorly in the international arena. As though we are not ready to pay, as though we can't cut a check. Why should we take all this? So the first question is it per incurium? In which case it loses the efficacy of being a binding precedent under 141. 2, if it's going to be a judgment, then it has to have only a prospective effect because such a theory was never propounded earlier. Why? Because whoever is now showcasing our country so poorly, all these investments have happened prior to 2011, please remember. They are not investments post 2011. So, at the time of investment, what was the prevalent law? The prevalent law was the 5-judge bench of McDowell. So, this law could not have traveled back. Which means you have a 5-bench law and you also have a 3-bench law. So, from an anti-investment angle, how do you resolve it? So, in its wisdom, because either you go and argue and say per incurium and ref, or else the third option, the court could have said, this is the doctrine which we want to propose, but we are sitting in 3, we could not have done it. So we'll refer it to a larger bench, place the matter before the Chief Justice to constitute a bench of 7 judges to reinvent McDowell, whether it's right or wrong in the present scenario. That did not happen. Therefore, an amendment which now nullifies this ratio, bringing it back in line with McDowell. Why is it and how is it called anti-investment? Is one question. I'll leave it to all of you to mull over. And the second critical point in all these matters is, can tax be part of an international arbitration, which is not a sovereign body under a particular nation's law? It is held, judged by people of very high esteem, respectful, all that is fine. We are testing it from a proposition. So, especially in the case of a BIT, see, in double taxation avoidance agreement, what do we say under 92 of the Income Tax Act? Parliament condescends, it yields, saying that if an assessee has a more preferable treatment in a treaty, which is an executive act, Parliament says, I will yield the benefit to the assessee under the treaty. So, sovereign power, which is so sacrosanct, ready to yield for an executive action, because that is how the global play happens. That is an understanding we have reached, and therefore we should respect the understanding. There is no such understanding whenever we entered into BITs. There is no such BIT. It doesn't say I'll yield to BIT anywhere. Therefore, whether tax can be a component of discussion in such matters is again issues. I thought it's a forum where I should place it for you to think over. So these are the things. And my final 4-5 minutes, Mukesh Bhai has said I should close at 3:10. I have just 1 or 2 issues for discussion.
So please take your time, sir.
No, 5 or no problem. No, everybody will be waiting. I'll try to do stay on my time. Now, in the international scenario, at least I want to park 4 issues for the consideration of this august body and its members and its listeners. One is double non-taxation. See, double taxation is one end of the pendulum, which is bad. Double non-taxation is another end of the pendulum, that is also bad. So, when positions are taken which results in double non-taxation, how should nations interpret double non-taxation? It's time we slowly evolve principles around it. And certainly, at least in India, going by the constitutional bench judgments, we need to interpret it quite fairly. So this is one issue which will have some significance on matters which will come up. The second is the royalty taxation, which I briefly touched to all of you. Now, the third is what practitioners have been spending their hours and time in building structures to ensure the action point or the location of the business is separated from the location of tax base, which is exactly what BEPS is trying to now resolve. So this difference at least is making practitioners, tax administrations, courts, and bodies to keep working again and again and again in various areas, more so in areas revolving intangibles. Because in intangibles, some can say it is immobile because it is found everywhere. Some can say mobility is easy, but intrinsic valuation is always a challenge. So these two allows people to scheme one way or the other. Whether it's a perfect scheme or a scheme to be tested, I'm not getting into it. I'm putting it at a broad issue as an issue level perspective only. This is one issue. Shifting of profits in so many ways. See, there are also issues in some cases which we recently saw, where people trying to claim higher deductions in high tax zones and lower deductions in low tax zones. This is one phenomena which, so this is why we are thinking of one world, one tax at some point of time. Then certainly we find out, at least being a law officer for 1 year, I'm able to see the time frame within which discussions have to take place. The positions of law, the legal implications under the respective jurisdictions from the bureaucratic or the tax administration perspective, and also how this is getting validated by the courts. There is always a mismatch. It's inevitable. In terms of time, in terms of the manner in which it is understood, now we are briefing councils across the world, at least 8, 9 very, very important jurisdictions. And we are able to see that what we say and what they say, there is always then it follow-up mails trying to clarify. It happens. It's not that everyone understands everything in a particular way. It's not possible. World doesn't work that way. So this mismatch is one area which again has advantages or disadvantages, as you may say, in both ways. And belated or deliberate or slowing the process of repatriation is again one more area which is an area of concern for both tax administration and to the taxing community. And the fourth point, which I feel at least it's important in the last 1 year when we tried a few things, the alignment of tax with the necessary impact of criminal jurisprudence. This is a very, very important area. As long as you deal a law as a civil process, it's going to be understood leniently and dealt with leniently and forgotten leniently, unless there is an angle of criminality to it. And criminal actions across the world happens very slowly. Let's not cite India as an example at all. Across the globe, it happens slowly. So unless this also improves, we have legislations in place dealing with criminal actions connected to tax. But the happening, when does it happen? How does it happen? In terms of resources, in terms of abilities, in terms of the size, there are ever so many reasons. And mismatch in the jury. You write something to some other country, it takes time. And when somebody has to part information, somebody goes to court in that country, it takes time. And there is an appellate mechanism, it takes time. So these are all processes which it's a huge web, which enables people to possibly think of that we can survive with even now with some structures. So my last 1 minute, I'll close down with saying, at least young people who are promising upcoming professionals in this branch of law, your era is going to be when we started with people like Mukesh to do the first Sony case in 2007. So we all sat to learn. As a lawyer, what would I know about MAM or FAR or ALP? So we all learned it over a period of time. Now, youngsters, your time has come to familiarize yourself with these terminologies: BEPS, POEM, and say GAR, then SEP, significant economic presence. I was listening to equalization levy for quite some time. And so these are all the terminologies. You should be very, very familiar, but remember, the bottom line is all these four-lettered words ultimately crack. Apparent is not real, and it populates and fills enough and more on substance over form theory. So as youngsters, as young professionals, you will be eager to save tax for your client. But have the, see, GAR especially, for example, GAR is another extreme. An agreement is proved, it gives the authority to presume an agreement to be invalid, presume an agreement to be an avoidant, and the burden shifts to you to prove that no, it is not an avoidant, it's a planning. It goes to that extent. So the periods and times have changed. So young professionals, be very careful, and in suggesting anything, think 100 times whether it'll support, it'll get validated, it'll survive the test of law. And judicial interpretations are also now becoming quite different across jurisdiction. As you see, so many judgments which our friend Giri keeps reporting every day. Every 15-30 minutes, there'll be something on us. So all these judgments very clearly point out the approach by the world, including the statement made by the US president last week, saying that US corporates has to pay minimum tax at least some point of time in some corner. So these are all the approaches which youngsters should bear it in mind. And it is a pleasure again, Mukesh Bhai, for giving me this opportunity to address all of you. Thank you once again. Namaste.
Thank you very much, sir. What a delight and pleasure to listen to you. I think you touched pretty much all the points, lent your wisdom, balanced it out. Equally, you very in a very spirited manner defended the government of India, which is actually your job to do that. It's indeed a privilege to have you for IFA. And, I wish, we had time for questions, but may I take the liberty to ask one question?
Sure.
And this is more to you as a law officer, defending the stance of the government in the final court of law. And the question is that you've been a practitioner for many, many years. We've had, authorities like the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal giving landmark judgments, and specifically in the area of international taxes, well, our judgments are quoted very, very widely in many foreign jurisdictions. There is an increasing feeling, not just amongst taxpayers, but also amongst the practitioners, that despite a well-reasoned judgment, there is a mechanical process that the Union of India follows for appealing. So it's one thing to say that the stakes are high and it should be appealed. And I don't know whether that makes your job interesting or tough when you finally have to defend those in the final court of law. But our suggestion, and if you have any comments, would be that if there is a rational evaluation that is made for determining whether to appeal or not to appeal, I think will reduce a lot of litigation in the country.
I'll give you my answer in two parts. At least me and some of my colleagues who are all ASGs, we stand by one principle before the Supreme Court. Whatever has already been filed and which comes before the court, if we feel in our judgment it does not merit a persuasion, either for admission or for a final hearing, we actually don't waste the time of the court. That's one decision, not only me, I'm very proud of my colleagues, few of them. All of us stand by that. Why are we doing that? We tell the court, for any reason we persuade and it gets admitted, after a few years, then it has to be heard at least for 2 days. So, a matter which does not require a resolution by the Honorable Supreme Court, we don't encourage the Supreme Court to, and we assist the Supreme Court, saying, please dismiss it. This is happening in big way. In addition to the automatic withdrawals based on tax effects. Now, coming to planning, taking a call. All of us are 1 year old, some are a little more experienced. I can't hold the breeze for others, but at least in my case, whatever, normally you are entitled to give an opinion in one line. Please prefer an appeal or don't prefer an appeal. It's possible after going through the papers, because well-prepared notes come to us. We don't prepare notes. Everybody does their homework and then send it to us. But I've always made it a point in this 1 year, anything to be appealed or not to be appealed, I write a very detailed opinion. That's one practice. I do it for myself. So it helps in two ways. If something need not be appealed, there will be reasons to say why it should not be appealed. If there are reasons to tell why it should be appealed, at least the advocate on record, when he or she prepares it, it will be a guide tool, because they will have notes, but from when law officer also recommends some grounds for it, then it facilitates them also to, I should encourage, there are a lot of youngsters who are ready to work. So this is a process I've been following for 1 year. So I've never feared in giving an opinion when something does not merit an appeal before the Supreme Court. We have always expressed it. So this is what we can do as an individual. Institution is larger.
Thank you very much, sir. A noted jurist mentioned that a law officer is supposed to be defending the Constitution and not the Union of India. I'm glad to hear that you stand by that philosophy. Now it's my job to express my gratitude. Thank you very much, sir. And we are indeed grateful to you. We join by thanking you.